Welcome back. We hope that you had a good afternoon yesterday and a good morning today, a good start. We had very productive concurrent sessions, so we hope that you enjoyed those as much as we did. And we're nearing the end of this UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development. We've had such great and key input over the course of the last few days from guests, from panelists, from ministers, and real concrete commitments on getting this ESD for 2030 roadmap into place. And we've also had some very important input from you as well. And just some numbers, we had more than 2,800 participants on the conference platform from 161 countries and more than 10,000 viewers of the public live stream. So thank you for so many of you joining us and being part of this conference and helping it become a success. Now, we did mention that one key outcome of this conference would be the Berlin Declaration. This is the document on the website, the outcome of the conference that you were able to comment on as well. And many of you did, and those were incorporated into this document, into this declaration. That will be presented in a moment. But first, we have three special rapporteurs who are going to give us a summary of this conference, give us their key takeaways of what they have learned and the most important points were for them. And I want to introduce them now to give us their takeaways. First and foremost, Mr. Arjen Wels. He is the UNESCO Chair for Social Learning and Sustainable Development at the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands. And then we'll also have Ms. Ruth Mulenga. She is a student at Copperbelt University in Zambia. And last but not least, we'll have Ms. Ronja Hallebach from UPAN. That is a German youth panel on ESD in Germany. First, I'll hand over to Mr. Wels.
Thank you, Ms. Samaskanda, for giving this opportunity to reflect on the conference and some of the outcomes. I'd like to start my reflections with a famous quote by Greta Thunberg. "I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean, yet you all come to us, young people, for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words." There have been many conferences like this one. The first major UN conference on the environment was held in Greta's native Sweden, in Stockholm in 1972, almost half a century ago. We should ask ourselves what signs can be seen now that show that this is not another conference, another declaration, and another call for action. How can we make sure that these past 3 days have been more than empty words? Having hopped between sessions and having collected input from colleagues from around the world and note takers, I conclude that there are many hopeful signs that ESD, sometimes under different flags and labels, is now moving from the margins to the mainstream. This conference is showing that more and more governments are beginning to see and recognize the importance of quality education in helping citizens around the world become more curious, critical, committed, capable, and empathic citizens. Although there's also research presented at this conference that shows that despite some progress on the policy front, there's still a lot of work to be done here in the coming years. I will highlight a few hopeful trends that seem to emerge at this conference. And I realize that there are more, and after me, Ruth and Ronja will also share theirs. First, whole Earth. In many sessions, it's emphasized that education needs to restore the connection between people and planet and improve relations, not just between people with different backgrounds and different starting points, but also between humans and the non-human world. Nature is becoming more at the center, and understanding that we are part of nature is becoming more at the center. This also implies that the SDGs should be seen as an interconnected web and not as another way of dividing up the world in silos. Systems thinking, place-based learning, connecting with indigenous perspectives are just some of the mechanisms that have been mentioned in various sessions. Second, whole community. Participants point out that local environments and communities with a wide range of stakeholders and existential issues are excellent spaces for social learning and contributing to meaningful change. It is within these so-called transition niches where people jointly explore issues around food, water, energy, climate, biodiversity, as well as issues around fairness, inclusion, and social and environmental justice. There's a lot of ESD happening in these so-called spaces in between that involve a mix of educational approaches, including citizen science. These learning communities can often take advantage of different kinds of knowledge, personal, scientific, indigenous, local, different forms of knowledge blending together. Third, the whole school. Clearly, ESD is no longer a topic that needs to be added to a full curriculum, but rather it is a catalyst to redesign the way schools operate. In many sessions, the whole school approach is highlighted as a way to focus more on local issues that are relevant to the live world of the students, but also as a way to bring in new forms of teaching and learning, such as inquiry-based learning, experiential learning, solution-oriented learning, and so on. These forms of learning all require boundary crossing between different subject areas, but also between school and community. And it is also good to see that in many countries, this approach is receiving policy support. In countries like Japan, Ghana, Norway, the Netherlands, but also in our host country, Germany, where some schools are introducing Friday, giving students 4 hours a week to make their own curriculum based on their own interests and concerns. Fourth, the whole brain. There's more talk within ESD about social emotional learning and embodied learning, where typically education centers on or focuses on cognitive learning. This implies creating more space for arts and the humanities, but also for asking different kinds of questions. As one of the presenters said, ask people not what they think or what they know, but ask them how they feel. Doing so will lead to a more holistic response that brings out the social, emotional, and the cognitive in an integrated way. And it creates the possibilities for empathy and compassion, which are both critical to sustainable development. Fifth and last, the whole system. As one participant from South Africa put it, we can't take a piecemeal approach when trying to change an education system that has been formed over hundreds of years and needs to change urgently. It requires a reconfiguration of the whole system. This transgressive and transformative perspective seems to gain support also among policymakers around the world. Clearly, ESD is not just focusing on changing behavior as it used to maybe in the early days. It also focuses on engaging in capacity building, collaborative action for changing systems and structures, also economic structures, as has been pointed out in the sessions on circularity and on regenerative economies and cultures. This implies creating pedagogical spaces that invite and support such action. Let me end by hoping that in 2030, when we likely will have another conference like this one, that Greta Thunberg will be the opening speaker and will tell us how far we have come, and that education indeed has been proven to be critical in turning us away from the pathway of self-destruction to the pathway of a more sustainable world for all. I would now like to hand the baton over to Ruth Mulenga. Ruth, please share some of your thoughts with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Taking you back to the first day of the conference, many panelists were concerned about the urgent action to take in order to accomplish the ESD 2030 goals. Based on my observation, the first speaker highlighted the need of proper financial budgeting and improvement of digital tools for both the learners and teachers. He said, resources are needed and we need to get schools online. This will allow us to scale up ESD teachers training. The second message which everyone brought on board, which was the common message each panelist brought on the table during this session, was that ESD should have a holistic system of education to ensure that youths can address global challenges and promote global citizenship. The third speaker brought out a very good, important called the PISA metrics. The presenter pointed out the issue of responsibility, where it lies, and the need of firm commitment, enhancing international solidarity. and knowledge sharing, which is needed to achieve the ESD 2030 goals. Going into day 2, session 5, this session really presented a number of initiatives aimed at tracking biodiversity loss and climate change to also pave the way of sustainability for future. Some challenges which were brought out were lack of financial resources, lack of access to information, lack and weak institutional capacity and support, to name a few. This called out an urgent action which needs to encourage to reverse biodiversity loss, is to have quality education, good governance, and safeguard our common home. Yes. These were points highlighted by different speakers during this session. Over to you, Rona.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you all for an insightful conference. I had the chance to listen to many inspirational people that are implementing ESD. That gives me hope and motivates me to keep engaging for ESD. One thing I was really happy to observe was the presence of young people in the opening and the focus on young generations in many sessions I attended. There was a lot of talking about youth, how we should be empowered as change makers. But there wasn't so much talking with youth. I appreciate everyone who aims to prepare us to take actions. I just want to point out that we are already aware of the challenges. And while we want to continue learning, I believe that you can also learn from us. Because as far as I know, there's no great master plan to save this planet, but ESD is our common tool to figure out solutions together. Maria Oyala said yesterday, we should listen to young people. They already have the maturity and cognitive skills to understand global problems. To do so, active and institutional youth participation is needed. I am lucky to be part of the UPenn, which is an example for institutional and active youth participation. We give our best to enrich the German ESD community, which is reflected by the following words of the German Federal Ministry of Research. To have youth with us is crucial. We need them. Their impatience helps us. They're inspiring. All I can add, we're happy to help. To conclude, I would like to share a thought from a fellow UPenn member. Imagine, she said, the Berlin Declaration would become a convention that puts ESD on one level with the Paris Agreement and the World Heritage Convention. As was stressed out countless times, we urgently have to implement ESD on every level. An international convention on ESD might sound like a dream today, but I would like to encourage us all to think big and live our dreams of a sustainable world and the transformation of our societies with ESD. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronya, Ruth, and Arjen, for sharing not just your key takeaways from this conference, but also those words of inspiration for moving forward. Now, I mentioned the Berlin Declaration as a key outcome of this conference. I'd like to bring in now Ms. Vibeke Jensen, who's the Director of the Division of Peace and Sustainable Development at UNESCO, to present and endorse that declaration.
Thank you, Sumi, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. We are about to finish 3 days of inspiring, substantive discussions where we have looked at ESD from many different perspectives. I think we can safely say that we have been touching on most aspects of the role of transformative education in promoting true sustainable development and spurring enhanced environment and climate action. We have already heard the summary of Professor Arjen Walz, the General Rapporteur of the conference, and the two youth rapporteurs, Ruth Molenka and Ronya Hallerbach. They provided excellent insights into the very rich discussions we've been having, and I thank you so much for that. One of the very tangible outcomes of these discussions and exchanges is the Berlin Declaration on Education for Sustainable Development, which I have the pleasure to briefly introduce and which has been available on the conference platform since a few days in the 6 UN languages. The declaration was drafted through a broad and inclusive consultative process in the months leading up to the conference itself. And it was led by a drafting group of UNESCO member states representatives. There was one designated member for each of UNESCO's regional electoral groups, the host of the current and the previous World Conference, namely Germany and Japan, as co-chairs, as well as UNESCO Secretariat. And the drafts prepared by the group went through various consultations. In a first phase, we circulated the draft electronically to a wide group of ESD education and sustainability stakeholders. And in the second phase, the text was shared with all UNESCO national commissions and delegations. In addition, the drafting group members also shared the text widely in their regional groups. Over 160 comments came in from 45 countries through this process. And the drafting group attempted to be highly inclusive and made a strong effort to take all relevant comments on board while keeping the text coherent, readable, and impactful. I want to take this opportunity to warmly thank the members of the drafting group for their dedicated work and for the constructive spirit in which it was carried out. I also would like to thank everyone who has submitted comments. But let me briefly introduce the declaration text. The declaration starts with an acknowledgement of the dramatic interrelated challenges the world is facing. In particular, the climate crisis, mass loss of biodiversity, pollution, pandemic diseases, extreme poverty and inequalities, violent conflicts and other crises that endanger life on the planet. The declaration highlights education as a powerful enabler of positive change and spells out ESD as the foundation for the required transformation of our world, providing everyone with the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes to become change agents for sustainable development. The declaration welcomes the new ESD 2030 framework and its roadmap for the implementation guiding documents for the next 10 years to mobilize action on ESD. With the declaration, stakeholders make a number of commitments to take ESD forward. And I want to stress commitments made within respective mandates and areas of responsibility and taking into account needs, capacities, available resources, and also national priorities. Some of the key commitments are to ensure that ESD is a foundational element of our education systems at all levels, with environmental and climate action as a core curricular component. To implement ESD with joint emphasis on cognitive, social, emotional, and behavioral learning dimensions, including promoting the required political action to bring about necessary changes and harnessing the power of ESD for the redesign of our societies. To invest in the capacity building of teachers, recognizing that they play a crucial role in transforming education. Other commitments concern whole institution approaches, the availability of resources, empowering young people, prioritizing the marginalized, and ensuring collaboration between the education sector and other sectors that have an impact on sustainable development. The declaration ends with a commitment to take its provisions forward through other important processes, such as the COP26 in Glasgow this year and beyond. Before I close my intervention, let me again thank the drafting group and all of you who have contributed to this declaration. As we have received no objections or significant amendments in our rounds of consultations and discussions, I'm very happy that we can consider the declaration adopted. I'm convinced that we have a strong and impactful text, which will help all of us to further mobilize for transformative education for sustainable development. Because as the declaration says, the time to learn and act for our planet is now. Thank you very much for your attention. And with this, I'm very happy to share with you a short video summary of the conference. Thank you.
We, the participants who convened online from the 17th to the 19th of May 2021 for the World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development, are convinced that urgent action is needed to address the dramatic interrelated challenges the world is facing.
For too long, we have continued business as usual.
Our only home in the universe is this special place down here.
Challenges that really concern me are, first of all, food and water security.
Never have we needed education on climate change and sustainable development more than we do today.
We are confident that education is a powerful enabler of positive change.
Bildung schafft Chancen und Perspektiven für die oder den Einzelnen, aber auch für die Gemeinschaft.
School is a place for education and the teaching of values.
La lutte contre le réchauffement climatique commence dans nos écoles.
Education for sustainable development is the foundation for the required transformation.
This starts with transformative learning, which empowers people to transform themselves and to take action to transform the world.
Education for sustainable development will be at the core of reimagining education.
ESD is a very education which equips learners with capabilities to respond to the unknown and abilities to transform society.
We commit to ensuring that education for sustainable development is a foundational element of our education systems at all levels, with environmental and climate action as a core curriculum component.
Fight against climate change must have an education face and a teacher's voice in every area of the world.
We will harness the power of education for sustainable development for the redesign of our societies.
We know the value that Indigenous knowledge can offer.
We will empower young people as change agents for sustainable development.
There are no words for being too late, because if it's not us, then who else?
We commit to taking the Berlin Declaration on Education for Sustainable Development and its provisions forward.
Wir haben ein großes gemeinsames Ziel, nämlich die Bildung für nachhaltige Entwicklung im deutschen Bildungssystem überall zu verankern.
The environment, it is critical in education, but all the other ministries of education must also be in sync.
The world must come together and cooperate in the implementation.
We must ensure that education for sustainable development is embedded in all education systems worldwide.
Transformative learning for people and the planet is a necessity for our survival and that of future generations. The time to learn and act for our planet is now.
Incredible to see how many voices took part in this conference. So thank you to Ms. Jensen as well for her contribution and summary there. So where do things go from here? What are the next steps for ESD for 2030? Well, we have now 5 statements from member states that are making clear commitments to putting this roadmap into place. So let's start with those. First and foremost, we have Ms. Sarah Anyang Agbor, who is the Commissioner for Education, Science, Technology and Innovation with the African Union.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Your Excellencies, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to speak here today on behalf of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency, Dr. Musa Faki Mahamat, to share with you some final thoughts on the closing of the UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development, Education for Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. This conference comes at a critical time when COVID-19 pandemic has had tragic impacts on human life and has threatened to reverse most of the progress we had achieved in education. It has challenged us to redesign our current paths, but also provided an opportunity for global change to build back better. We must now aim in transforming learning for our societies towards sustainability. This asserts the role of transformative education and the ESD Berlin Declaration for Education for Achieving Sustainable Development Goals. The past 3 days' deliberations have indeed been fruitful and foregrounded the need for concrete and concerted efforts in building education systems that support learners to be responsible and active contributors to more sustainable societies and a healthy planet. We must also acknowledge that we still have a critical role to play. Country presentations at the conference mentioned some key challenges and opportunities at country level, including loss of biodiversity, among other environmental challenges. It is imperative that the member states' plans and commitments in addressing these challenges as made during the conference are followed through and implemented. Therefore, there is an urgent need to incentivize global level actors to support country level actions in the implementation of these commitments. In so doing, we also have to ensure that we are inclusive and leave no one behind. Concrete efforts have to be made to reach the poor and excluded groups and constituencies, including countries emerging from conflict and fragile states, especially Africa. Education is the greatest weapon that can transform the world, says Madimba Nelson Mandela. Therefore, quality education can be upscaled by the African Union DOTSS approach for a holistic system of education, because new skills must be acquired through lifelong learning and adult education. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the African Union strongly believes that we must act urgently and now to tackle the common education challenges our continent is now facing that have been so eloquently presented at this conference. This is also echoed in the Continental Strategy for Technical and Vocational Education and Training to foster youth employment, with a paradigm shift on the development of TVET systems that prepare young people to become job creators rather than job seekers. The Continental Education Strategy for Africa 2016-2025, the African domestication and implementation of the SDG for Education 2030 agenda buttresses this point further. The strategy, in one of its guiding principles, considers quality and relevant education, training, and research as core for scientific and technological innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. This strategy is also aimed at providing the African continent with efficient human resources adapted to African core values, and its implementation requires that we as stakeholders work in coordination towards pursuing the development of various thematic priority areas of education for sustainable development. Education for sustainable development must be tech savvy. That is where the African Union digital transformation strategy becomes relevant. Thank you very much for the takeaway and outcomes. We cannot steal the dreams of the children and youth of Africa with empty words and not become cemeteries of workshops. Hence, we must walk the talk. So ESD has to move toward the talk, and AU CESAR is pushing the drive for member states to implement the talk. It is on education, it is through education that we can recover the post-COVID pandemic, education that speaks to skills and competencies. So sustainability, I agree, is only ensured by financing and international financing, good governance, and a political will, as well as capacity building and infrastructures. So ESD must be championed in every nook and cranny of our continent and at every level of the education chain, because ESD is a call for action to deliver on our promises and ambitions. In conclusion, Excellencies, Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, allow me to express my hope that this conference fulfills its promise that together we can work in shaping a sustainable future. As was observed during the conference, young people, especially in Africa, demand an acceleration of sustainability across all sectors, and education is the most powerful tool that we have to address sustainability effectively. Through cooperation, curriculum review, upscaling the teaching profession, enabling environment, harnessing the power of ESD, political will, commitment, and clear vision, we shall navigate these challenging times successfully and deliver on education for sustainable development. Lasting gratitude to UNESCO for organizing this UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development. Thank you very much for listening.
And thank you, Ms. Agbor, for that call to action from the African Union. Now we can hear from Mr. Nicolás Trota, who's the Minister of Education of Argentina.
El gran desafío que enfrenta la humanidad, que nuestra América Latina no solo no está exenta, sino que es un desafío de mayor complejidad, es la profunda desigualdad. Y cómo nuestro sistema educativo, como nuestra escuela, se consolida como principal, no única, pero sí principal herramienta de ruptura de las profundas desigualdades. El impacto de la pandemia ha sido muy marcado en el 2020, en el 2021, en la humanidad y en nuestro país en particular. Y a partir de allí se nos presenta el desafío de garantizar la continuidad educativa y pedagógica en el marco de una profunda desigualdad en América Latina y al mismo tiempo estructurar lo que deben ser las transformaciones en nuestro sistema educativo de cara a la voluntad de desarrollo sostenible de nuestra sociedad. En el corto plazo, por supuesto, consolidar y reactivar la agenda de conectividad con distribución de dispositivos tecnológicos, principalmente en las escuelas en situación de derechos más vulnerados, y por el otro lado garantizar la gratuidad de la navegabilidad educativa. Al mismo tiempo, todo el trabajo vinculado a una agenda analógica de distribución de material gráfico para llegar a cada una de las familias argentinas a lo largo del 2020, un 2021 que se ha caracterizado también por el desafío de recuperar la presencialidad en el marco de estrictos protocolos e instancias de cuidado. Nuestro país, más allá de la realidad de la pandemia, por supuesto está planteando una agenda de priorización de lo que debe ser el sistema educativo nacional. Por un lado, presentando ante el Congreso Nacional una nueva ley de justicia educativa, donde estamos planteando una inversión sobre nuestro Producto Bruto Interno del 8%, 6% para la educación obligatoria en todos sus niveles, y por el otro lado 2% para la educación superior, universitaria, terciaria y de formación de nuestros maestros y maestras. Al mismo tiempo poner un eje central en la formación de nuestros maestros como herramienta de transformación y seguir desplegando instancias como son las becas Progresar de acompañamiento a las trayectorias educativas. El presupuesto 2021 ha tenido un crecimiento más importante en términos interanuales en el campo educativo de su historia, cuestión que debemos seguir consolidando. Y en el marco de lo que ha sido un paso muy importante de nuestro país, se ha aprobado hace algunos días en el Senado de la Nación, luego de su tratamiento en la Cámara de Diputados, de la Ley de Educación Ambiental Integral, que también nos va a permitir llevar esta agenda a cada una de nuestras escuelas, pensando juntos con nuestro sistema educativo, con todos los actores del sistema educativo, un desarrollo sostenible y con justicia social en nuestro país.
Thank you, Mr. Trota, for that contribution from Argentina. Now we will hear from Ms. Madiha Al-Shaibani, who is the Minister of Education of Oman.
السيدات والسادة المحترمون، الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسرني بداية أن أنقل لكم تحياتي حضرة صاحب الجلالة السلطان هيثم بن طارق سلطان عمان، وتمنياته لأعمال مؤتمركم بالتوفيق والنجاح في تحقيق أهدافه وغاياته المرسومة. الحضور الكريم، لقد أثبتت جلسات المؤتمر في اليومين السابقين والنقاشات التي دارت من قبل المشاركين من دول العالم المختلفة أن التنمية المستدامة تعد من أهم القضايا المعاصرة التي تتطلب التركيز عليها من خلال إيجاد الحلول المناسبة لتحقيق أهدافها ووضع استراتيجيات وطنية لمواجهة التحديات التي تعترضها. وإيمانا من دول المنطقة بأهمية تنفيذ التزاماتها في تحقيق أهداف التعليم من أجل التنمية المستدامة، فقد أنشأت لجانا وفرق عمل على المستوى الوطني تعنى بمتابعة تنفيذ هذه الأهداف وإدراجها في المناهج الدراسية، خصوصا تلك التي تتعلق بالحفاظ على بيئة مستدامة وقضايا التغير المناخي والحد من أوجه عدم المساواة والقضاء على الفقر والجوع وتحقيق السلام والعدل. الحضور الكريم، حرصت دول المنطقة على التشاور فيما بينها لتبادل الخبرات وأفضل الممارسات على المستوى الإقليمي، فتم إطلاق خارطة طريق التعليم من أجل التنمية المستدامة 2030 للدول العربية في نوفمبر 2020 ميلادي. كما نظم مكتب اليونسكو في بيروت بالتعاون مع منظمة التنمية المستدامة في سبتمبر 2020 ورشة عمل على المستوى الإقليمي، وذلك ضمن استراتيجية اليونسكو للتعليم والتدريب الفني والمهني تيفت 2016-2021، والتي تعنى بثلاث أولويات رئيسية هي توظيف الشباب وريادة الأعمال وتعزيز المساواة بين الجنسين وتيسير الانتقال للاقتصادات الخضراء والمجتمعات المستدامة. وفي بلاد سلطنة عمان، وتأكيداً على ما جاء في وثيقة إطار العمل الجديد بأن التعليم من أجل التنمية المستدامة جزء لا يتجزأ من أهداف التنمية المستدامة المتعلق بالتعليم الجيد وعنصر تمكيني رئيسي لجميع أهداف التنمية المستدامة الأخرى، فإن سياسات السلطنة تعمل على تنفيذ ذلك من خلال رؤية عمان 2040، وهي رؤية وطنية شاملة ومتكاملة تتضمن 11 توجها استراتيجيا، أهمها التوجه الاستراتيجي المتعلق بالتعليم. كما أن فلسفة التربية في السلطنة تتضمن أهدافاً مرتبطة بالتعليم من أجل التنمية المستدامة وأهدافاً أخرى مرتبطة بالمواطنة والقيم والتربية على حقوق الإنسان. حضورنا الكريم، لا يخفى عليكم مدى تأثير جائحة كوفيد-19 على قدرة العديد من الدول في تنفيذ التزاماتها لتحقيق أهداف التعليم من أجل التنمية المستدامة، خاصة فيما يتعلق بتحقيق الهدف الرابع، والذي دفع كافة الدول لإعادة ترتيب أولوياتها للتعامل مع المتغيرات التي أفرزتها الجائحة. وإقليمياً، نظم المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي بالشراكة مع مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج والمركز الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم ورشة حول واقع تطبيق الهدف الرابع من أهداف التنمية المستدامة للتعليم 2030 للبحث عن الآليات المناسبة للتخفيف من آثار الجائحة. ومن هذا المنبر ندعو المجتمع الدولي والشركاء الأساسيين للتعاون والتكاتف وتقديم الدعم المادي والفني والمعنوي للدول الأكثر تضرراً من هذه الجائحة والدول التي تمر بأزمات الحروب، والأخذ بيدها للمضي قدماً في تحقيق أهداف التعليم من أجل التنمية المستدامة. إن الطريق لتحقيق أهداف التعليم من أجل التنمية المستدامة مليء بالتحديات، إلا أنه مع وجود الرغبة الصادقة سنتجاوز آثار هذا الوباء من خلال العمل بجدية تامة لتحقيق أهداف التعليم من أجل التنمية المستدامة، لينشأ جيل يؤمن بالمواطنة العالمية ويسعى للعيش في بيئة نظيفة ومجتمع متماسك مترابط ينشد تحقيق العدالة والسلام في رحاب الكرة الأرضية أجمع. وفي الختام، لا يسعني إلا أن أشكر القائمين على تنظيم هذا المؤتمر، وعلى رأسهم الوزارة الاتحادية الألمانية للتعليم والبحوث ومنظمة الأمم المتحدة للتربية والعلم والثقافة، متمنية أن تسهم مخرجات هذا المؤتمر وإعلان برلين في التأكيد على الالتزام الدولي بالتعليم من أجل التنمية المستدامة لتحقيق الأهداف والغايات المرجوة. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you, Ms. Madiha Al-Shaibani, Minister of Education from Oman, for that message. Now we will hear from Ms. Aishat Ali, Minister of Education from the Maldives.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It is heartening and delightful to meet with you all in spite of the raging pandemic and its impact on schooling around the world. I thank UNESCO for arranging this platform to take stock of our progress in achieving the SDGs and to share our roadmap for ESD for 2030. The Maldives government had placed the top priority on education, as evidenced in the budget. Education appropriation constitutes the highest allocation of the national budget. It is easier to talk the talk than walk the difficult but necessary walk. The government's thinking and policy priorities are reflected in the Strategic Action Plan and the National Resilience and Recovery Plan developed as a response to COVID-19. Both call for catalyzing education provision and prioritizing skills development to build knowledge, human capital, and capabilities. The government affirms the transformational role of education to empower individuals and societies and raise happiness and harmony. The current pandemic has awoken us yet again to the interconnectedness of the world, its vulnerability to epidemics, and the importance of self-reliant, aware communities who value health, climate, disaster, and poverty reduction, and sustainable consumption. The rationale for ESD for 2030 has never been more cogent and compelling. 3 recent developments in the Maldives will accelerate ESD integration. To begin with, the first ever Education Act stipulates education for sustainable development as an objective of schooling, making it a legal imperative. Second, the major review of the national curriculum is in progress. This will give us the opportunity to integrate the curricula and pedagogical elements of ESD for 2030 in the school curriculum. Third, one of the major focus of the National Resilience and Recovery Plan developed as a response to COVID-19 is on building a more resilient and sustainable economy. Hence, there's a push from the government in advancing policies that support ESD, which is not limited to the education sector, but encompasses all the sectors. As an example of how the Maldives is trying to advance our policies with elements of ESD, I would like to share one of our projects, the Green School Project. The main objectives of this project are to reduce the environmental footprint at the school level and individual level, to promote eco-literacy of the whole school community, and to enhance climate prosperity by preparing students for a low-carbon future. In alignment with ESD for 2030, the focus of the project is on nurturing a resilient, innovative generation. Time does not allow me to expand on other initiatives. Though we have started work towards ESD for 2030, I would like to highlight that the process of reorienting the formal education system towards sustainable development is not an easy task. And this is an area for which we seek support from UNESCO and our friends, especially for funding our initiatives. Before I conclude, I would also like to stress the importance of commitment on investment in education. As a small island development state, we, the Maldives, needs to invest more in preparing people with the knowledge, skills, and values to respond to the adverse effects of climate change and other challenges ahead. We need to invest more on bringing the out-of-school youth in this region back to school and re-engage them in learning. We need to invest more in reshaping the skills development programs and making sure that this region does not fall way behind in achieving the SDG Goal 4. Firm commitment, investment, and dedication towards achieving SDG 4 and ESD for 2030 are needed for the preservation and for keeping the competitive edge of our children and youth, because our common future depends on our present actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aishat Ali, Minister of Education from the Maldives, for that contribution. And finally, now we will hear from Ms. Matilda Ernkrans, who is the Minister of Education and Research from Sweden.
Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I want to thank UNESCO and the government of Germany for hosting this conference. Climate change, unequal access to education, gender inequality, poverty, mass loss of biodiversity, and undemocratic movements. These are all interconnected challenges, challenges that cannot be met by one nation alone. We must work together to truly achieve a sustainable development. All young people have a right to be included. This is a matter of equity. Their knowledge and experience are invaluable for the success of the 2030 agenda. Being a Swedish minister, I am proud of the movement Greta Thunberg has inspired, which gathers millions of young people all over the world, urging us to act now. Sweden has set out to be one of the first fossil-free welfare countries in the world. This guides us in all areas. When it comes to education for a sustainable development, it is integrated at all policy levels of the Swedish education system, from preschool to adult and higher education, as well as in teacher education, in lifelong learning, including vocational training, to ensure the transition to sustainable economy and jobs. But policy documents are not enough. Therefore, I want to underline the importance of monitoring and implementation when it comes to bring about a more sustainable world. In Sweden, we have evaluated the implementation at our universities and then asked them to follow up on the results. And we are also carrying out an inspection of secondary schools, which indicates that systematic implementation needs to improve. One of Sweden's strengths regarding education for sustainable development is that many parts of our society are engaged, from civil society to universities. I also want to highlight that UNESCO has an essential role in supporting national efforts. Sweden looks forward to the establishment of country initiatives and is currently mapping the national ESD work. This conference, the kickoff of the framework for ESD 2030, must lead our way, and it is up to us to deliver in practice better than we do today, every one of us, based on science, but also on equity. The most well-educated and prosperous societies still makes the largest ecological footprints. Education for sustainable development is necessary, and so is implementation and joint action. I also want to add that education for sustainable development must have a human rights-based approach. Full human rights is a fundamental part of a sustainable society. We only have a few more years to achieve the goals in the 2030 agenda, and the time to act is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Matilda Ernkrans, the Minister of Education and Research of Sweden. And we've now seen the Berlin Declaration presented and endorsed, and we've also seen member states make commitments. I'd like to now bring in two speakers representing the two hosts of this conference, if you will, the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research and UNESCO, for some closing remarks. First, I would like to introduce Mr. Christian Luft, the Secretary of State of the Federal Ministry of Education and Research in Germany. Dr. Luft, the floor is yours.
Herzlichen Dank. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, liebe Freunde der BNE. Nun geht eine wirklich historische Konferenz zu Ende. Historisch aufgrund der dringenden Herausforderungen, vor denen wir stehen, historisch aufgrund der großen Zahl und der Diversität an Akteuren und an Akteurinnen, die sich ausgetauscht haben. Und historisch aufgrund unserer Geschlossenheit hinter einer starken Botschaft unserer Declaration of Berlin. Wir haben hinter uns 3 intensive Tage. Wir haben gemeinsam mit allen Facetten der Bildung für nachhaltige Entwicklung uns auseinandergesetzt. Und ich glaube, wir sind jetzt bestens vorbereitet für die Dekade bis 2030. Quer über den Planeten haben wir uns gegenseitig über unsere eigenen Strategien, über unsere Aktionen und Vorhaben ausgetauscht. Die Teilnahme von 85 Ministerinnen und Ministern und Vertreterinnen und Vertretern aus über 160 Staaten zeigt, der gemeinsame Auftakt für das neue UNESCO-Programm hat einen riesigen Impact. Wir haben zahlreiche Expertinnen und Experten aus internationalen Organisationen, aus der Wissenschaft, aus der Zivilgesellschaft, der Wirtschaft gehört und wir haben neue Wege für BNE aufgezeigt bekommen. Wir haben aus dem Bericht zur Bildung und Umwelt der UNESCO wichtige Botschaften über die Dringlichkeit einer Intensivierung unserer Arbeit für mehr Nachhaltigkeit in der Bildung erfahren. Und natürlich, wir haben auch vielfältige Einblicke durch die Berichte von BNE-Akteurinnen und Akteuren aus aller Welt, aus ihren ganz konkreten Bildungskontexten vor Ort erhalten. Und wir haben innovative Projekte und gute Praxis bei der Umsetzung von BNE kennengelernt. Mit diesem breiten Strauß an Beiträgen sind wir jetzt, glaube ich, wirklich gut gerüstet für die notwendige Umsetzung der SDGs in unseren Ländern, in unseren Regionen, in unseren Kommunen und vor allen Dingen für den Aufbau einer nachhaltigeren Gesellschaft. Wir haben uns auch intensiv mit den sehr aktuellen Herausforderungen auseinandergesetzt. Und in der Tat stehen wir vor großen Herausforderungen. Dem Klimawandel, der Biodiversität, dem grünen Wachstum und der Kreislaufwirtschaft, unserem Umgang mit der Natur, aber auch mit Ungleichheiten und mit Gesundheitsrisiken, wie wir sie ja gerade bei der Pandemie jetzt sehen. Und natürlich mit der Antwort, die Bildung und insbesondere Bildung für nachhaltige Entwicklung auf diese Fragen geben kann. In unseren Diskussionen ging es auch um die Schlüsselthemen des neuen UNESCO-Programms BNE 2030, die uns in den nächsten 10 Jahren beschäftigen werden. Zum einen um den nicht ganz so einfachen Begriff des transformativen Handelns, also des Handelns jedes Einzelnen für eine nachhaltige Gesellschaft. Und zum anderen um die Auseinandersetzung mit technologischen Fortschritten, darunter so wichtige Themen wie die Digitalisierung. Ich persönlich fand diesen intensiven und auch teilweise natürlich emotionalen Austausch wichtig. Der Austausch war wichtig, um zu klären, welche Schwerpunkte angesichts des neuen Programms von wem gesetzt werden sollen und vor allen Dingen, wie prioritär das alles ist. Aber ganz ehrlich, Debatten sind wichtig, Diskussionen sind unerlässlich, aber Debatten und Diskussionen sind auch nicht alles. Nun beginnt die Zeit des Handelns. Und wir sind die Akteurinnen und Akteure, die jetzt gefragt sind. Mit wir meine ich die Politik, die Bildungseinrichtungen, Lehrende, Lernende, Jugend vor allen Dingen und kommunale Akteure, aber auch die Wirtschaft. Und deswegen bin ich besonders stolz auf die Berliner Deklaration. Nicht nur, weil sie in Berlin und das auch noch in digitaler Form beschlossen wurde. Ich glaube, Sie wissen schon, mit welcher Ehre wir dieser Aufgabe begegnet sind, diese Konferenz ausrichten zu dürfen. Und wir sind besonders stolz darauf, dass diese Berliner Deklaration so stark formuliert ist und so substanziell. Wir verpflichten uns damit, BNE in allen Bereichen der Bildungskette strukturell zu verankern. Von der frühkindlichen Bildung über die Schulbildung, die berufliche Bildung und vor allem auch die nonformale Bildung bis hin zur Hochschulbildung im Sinne einer Bildungstransformation. Jetzt müssen wir aktiv an deren Verwirklichung arbeiten. Mit unserer nationalen Konferenz, die wir in wenigen Minuten starten, beginnen wir jetzt gleich. Sie sind ganz herzlich dazu eingeladen und ich darf Ihnen versichern, auch in den ersten Stunden wird auch in Ihren Sprachen gedolmetscht. Ich möchte diese Gelegenheit aber auch nutzen. Ich möchte sie nutzen, ein letztes Plädoyer für die Wichtigkeit der Kommunikation über BNE zu halten. Unsere Berlin Declaration sollte so breit wie möglich gestreut werden. Nicht nur von Regierungsmitgliedern, sondern von uns allen. Von den Organisationen der Zivilgesellschaft, den Wissenschaftseinrichtungen, den Wirtschaftsverbänden und von allen, die hier an dieser Konferenz teilgenommen haben. Es geht darum, über BNE zu kommunizieren, damit alle verstehen, worum es dabei geht und was BNE mit dem eigenen Leben zu tun hat. Sie wissen genauso gut wie ich, dass BNE ein Begriff ist, der sich nicht von selbst erklärt. Deswegen ist dieses Commitment aller Staaten ein sehr wichtiger Beitrag, um BNE in der Gesellschaft voranzubringen. Ich danke Ihnen ganz herzlich für diesen wunderbaren Kraftakt. Mein Dank gilt insbesondere auch dem gesamten Konferenzorganisationsteam. Und dieses ist wirklich groß, denn eine digitale Konferenz verlangt eine viel intensivere Betreuung als eine physische. Und wir, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, liebe BNE-Partnerinnen und Partner, wir bleiben im Austausch. Denn die Nachhaltigkeitstransformation gelingt nur gemeinsam. Am besten im Rahmen des neuen UNESCO-Netzwerkes. Ich hoffe, dass von diesen Tagen wirklich auch eine Aufbruchsstimmung in die Welt geht. Und dass wir nicht nur debattieren, sondern dass wir uns gemeinsam unterhaken und jetzt unsere Ideen und Vorstellungen auch wirklich in die Tat umsetzen. Dabei brauchen wir Sie und damit vertraue ich in Sie, dass wir das gemeinsam umsetzen. Vielen Dank für diese Tage. Alles Gute für die nächsten Jahre. Dankeschön.
Thank you, Dr. Luft, and to the Ministry of Education and Research for generously supporting this conference. And I'd like to give the final word now to someone who really has been a guiding force over the last 3 days, Ms. Stefania Giannini, the Assistant Director General of Education at UNESCO.
Thank you very much. State Secretary Christian Luft, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end. We are coming to the end of the World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development after 3 very inspiring, very intensive days, let me say, honestly. Holding a World Conference in a purely online setting comes with great challenges. We knew from the beginning. It's about not being able to meet together in Berlin, as we hoped. It's about not being able to taste the city atmosphere we like, and not being able to be welcomed by our German hosts there. However, our ability to connect virtually also is giving us other opportunities, diversify somehow our participation. We heard voices really from every single corner of the world in these last 3 days, connected across the globe with people of all ages and walks of life. And this is really an added value, I should say. We come together with our joint conviction that education holds the key to our response to the dramatic crisis the world is facing. So, despite its challenges, I can say that it's been a rewarding conference. I can also firmly say that it has been a very successful conference. Let me mention some numbers just to see what we are talking about. We had, as an overall participation, some more than 13,000. That means 2,800 participants on the conference platform from 161 countries, and more than 10,000 viewers of the public live stream. And this is another important dimension I want to stress. We have seen strong political will with the statements from more than 70 ministers and deputy ministers, and I'm really very grateful to all of those who have participated to the meetings and roundtables organized. We have seen a huge and encouraging amount of dedicated good practices from all across the world, driven by passionate individuals and committed organizations. And we have come together to create a strong Berlin Declaration on Education for Sustainable Development, which is the outcome of the conference where we are starting from. In this declaration, the entire education community acknowledges the urgency and the scale of the global challenges we are facing, especially the climate emergency. In this declaration, we acknowledge the power of education to turn things around. I should say education being a big part of the solution. Not any education, of an education that builds the knowledge, creates the awareness, and leads to the necessary big change, disruptive change we need, from knowledge to awareness, to action, to transform the world. And in order to be transformative, we know education should transform itself. And education needs to change the model and to include many dimensions that has been discussed during these last 3 days. That is why we have committed to make sustainability and climate action a core element of education, investing in teacher training, in whole school approaches, and into cross-sectoral collaboration. The cross-sectoral dimension is another evident outcome of this conference, and it's a call for action which is not simply directed to educators and ministers of education, but all the main stakeholders which are responsible of taking this commitment and carrying on. Learning across sectors is indeed key. The challenges we are facing are multifaceted. The education sector will not be able to confront all of them alone. UNESCO role is a central one, and we are happy to take this responsibility, share responsibility with all of you. UNESCO will provide all our possible support to take forward the results of this conference as foreseen in the ESD for 2030 roadmap. We are grateful for the support of our partners to implement the roadmap itself, among them the governments of Japan and Sweden. We'll just listen the Swedish minister with clear mind and words on that. And hopefully many other countries that will come on board, I'm sure. We will support country-level action and capacity building, which are two other concrete dimensions we have to develop in the coming months and years. We will provide guidance and support to teachers and other key personnel of the education sector. And we will facilitate exchange of good practices and mutual learning through a global network on ESD. We already seen and heard during these 3 days that many things are already happening on the ground. And so it's important that we build a common place, a platform where these good practices can be valorized and can be somehow scaling up. We will also facilitate exchange of knowledge and content that can become a part of the curriculum development that we are talking about. We will support definitely monitoring the progress of ESD across the world. This will be part of our monitoring of target point 4.7 of the SDGs. We'll complement this with additional data collection and analysis to have a clear picture where countries stand and to be able to implement the right policies at the right time. We'll also make sure that ESD continues to be recognized as a central element of the global education agenda. We know that there is a big momentum this year. For many reasons we already discussed in this conference, there will be an important critical meeting at the end of this year in Glasgow, the COP26. And we know that creating this bridge, these linkages between education and the other sectors is critical. However, it's important that it's not simply here and now, but we can go ahead with this new cultural mindset, so to say, to develop a real powerful ESD agenda. And we'll do this in full alignment with SDG 4 coordination and other important international agendas that in charge to be developed, in particular, already mentioned the UNFCCC process. But let me mention something we heard about in this conference, like the Pope Francis initiative of a new global compact on education, which is very much grounded on the same attention to ESD and 4.7. And we will do this with important partners such as the new Mission 4.7 initiative. Well, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the conference would have not been possible without the support and the partnership of our German hosts. And let me say a few words from the bottom of my heart on behalf of UNESCO and myself about that. I would like to reiterate my heartfelt thanks to the government of Germany, in particular the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, for the generous funding and the trustful collaboration along the way. Thank you to the German Commission for UNESCO for its advisory support along the preparation process, which is a long one, I can assure, and a very exciting one. Sometimes the process is as well important as the product, and this is the case. Thank you also to the ministry, other partners who work day and night to make this conference a success in this challenging and new online environment. I also really thank my dedicated dream team in UNESCO's education sector, which has shepherded the preparation through many challenges with a lot of passion, a lot of knowledge, a lot of commitment to these topics. Really a big thanks to all of them. And special thanks go, of course, to the technical staff that has overcome many challenges to ensure the smooth running of this big online conference could happen. We are very grateful to them. We usually don't see technical experts and people who help us. They are usually behind the scenes, behind the platform, which you say, but they are critical people, especially in this new normal. Thank you to the excellent interpreters, and thank you to all participants who have shown dedication and enthusiasm that I'm sure will continue in the coming days and years around this common mission. Well, to conclude, I should say that much work lies ahead to transform our world through the education and learning, to make it a better place for all living beings. The conference has laid an excellent basis for all these efforts. We turn our eyes now to other milestones already mentioned, COP26 in Glasgow late this year. Above all, we will continue to work to scale up education for sustainable development, because we know that transformative learning for people and the planet is a necessary component, a necessary factor, enabling factor for our survival and the heritage we are giving to future generations. We have only one planet, we know. We don't have a plan B. The time to learn and act for this mission, these shared responsibilities, is absolutely here and now. And I thank you, all of you, very much for being with us and taking with us this important commitment in front of young people, in front of all citizens in the world who are convinced, as we are, that through education, in education, we can find a big part of the solution we need. I thank you very much, and the conference now is really closed.
And thank you, Ms. Giannini. As we heard there, this conference has kicked off this ESD for 2030 agenda, but the work certainly is not done. In fact, it is just the beginning. The real work of implementing the framework now starts. Now, just after this international conference wraps up, the German National Conference will begin. It will go from this afternoon into the evening. So for all of the German speakers and watchers out there, please do join us for that. And then, Ms. Giannini mentioned this as well. Next week, regional technical meetings will go into the country initiatives. There are regional meetings in North America, Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Arab states. And the information on those regional meetings are in the chat, the links to those. So do join those. And then next year, UNESCO will organize 5 regional meetings to help member states implement the ESD for 2030 framework. So certainly there is a lot of work to be done, and we hope you continue to join us for that process. Now, you can imagine that organizing such a conference like this is no easy feat, and this is one of the first that UNESCO has organized in this format, entirely virtual. So you will receive an evaluation form per email, and we would like you to fill that out and let us know what you thought of the conference, what you thought worked well, where there might be some room for improvement, and all of your input will help shape the future conferences, the conferences that come now down the road. So that just leaves me to say thank you again to all of you for joining us. I hope you will join me in extending a warm and hearty round of applause virtually to all of the hundreds of people from the ministry, from UNESCO, the technical staff and crew, the translators, who all worked around the clock to make sure that this conference was a success. So as I said, this is just the beginning. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.